Channel 7 is pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations.
I was homeless, without a place to stay, and I was really having a real tough time.
I had a feeling of being displaced, not knowing where I was or who I was anymore, being torn inside.
I didn't know where we were going to go. I really didn't. I thought me and him was just going to be out on the streets.
And when we came into the program, I expected to see rolls of beds or something like a shelter would be, but it's not at all like a shelter. When you get into the program, it's quite different than what you'd expect. They made you feel at home. It was like home.
Yeah. You want to take your coat off and stay a little while?
The Interfaith Hospitality Network is a program that enables churches and synagogues to work together to help homeless families. Hundreds of thousands of Americans who simply can't afford a place to live. Each congregation participating in the network helps to ease this crisis by providing meals and overnight accommodations for 1 week, once every 2 to 3 months. The volunteer hosts set up the hospitality room, cook dinner, and stay overnight with the guests. And they do more. They listen. They care.
How's that? That's cold water now. You don't have to worry about that.
They make a difference.
Okay, you can...
Okay, you all done.
The Interfaith Hospitality Network is working at breaking down stereotypes for the homeless families in the Austin community. During the next half hour, we invite you to join us in discussing the efforts of the Interfaith Hospitality Network here in the capital city.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC-TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Volunteers from 20 Austin area churches share in a unique effort to meet the needs for food and shelter of homeless families. But their efforts don't stop there. Providing a nurturing and healthy environment is also essential to this work. I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And with me in the studio are 3 individuals who are active in these efforts. Tamara Landry works as program director for Interfaith Hospitality Network. We're also pleased to have with us Maria Newman, who has served as a coordinator at Central Presbyterian Church and who is on the Foundation for the Homeless Board. Paul Danley also joins us. He's a member of the Church of the Hills and is the coordinator for that congregation. And we're delighted to have all you folks.
Thank you.
And would like to begin, Tamara, since you're the director of the program, to give us a little bit of a sense of how it has come about, both as we had suggested in the videotape and as it's come to Austin as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, it was started, Rich, about 1986. A woman, Karen Olson, had passed people on the street many times in New York City and decided she wanted to do something about that and got her family involved in passing out food, and that was kind of the beginnings of the network. Today, it has 450 congregations across the United States, as well as 30 networks in various cities in the United States.
And when did it come to Austin?
It came to Austin last year in 1993 as far as the starting up of the network. However, a lot of work goes into that, and it was probably a year before we had all the commitments from the different churches in order to participate.
I see. It took some startup time, in other words.
Yes.
Right. Okay, well, you folks are representing a couple of these congregations, and Paul, just give us a sense of what it's been like at your church in terms of, can you remember those early days?
You bet. We heard about the Interfaith Hospitality Network through Foundation for the Homeless, and our church very quickly, I think, embraced the idea of this type of an outreach to the homeless families in the Austin area, and we're really excited about it very quickly, and really glad to be involved as one of the churches in the network.
And you were one of the original. I think you have to have 13 in order to make this system go, and then some supportive churches as well.
Right. We have 13 churches that rotate weekly, so 4 times a year with 13 churches covers the entire year. So our church is very much like all the others, just looked at it as an opportunity to really, in a real practical way, help without a whole lot of time and commitment from any individuals.
You can do a lot with relatively little, in a sense of in terms of both the time and the money, I think. Maria, you've been at this from the beginning as well. Can you add to what Paul or Tamara said?
Well, as far as what Tamara said, we did start up the program in May of 1993, so we have just celebrated our first full year of churches serving the homeless families in their buildings. But we had 1 full year of startup time prior to that, and we learned about the Interfaith Hospitality Network. Grace Lee, who is the director of the Foundation for the Homeless, learned about the network and saw it as a very viable program that the foundation could support. So a core group of people, well, first she had a meeting at Central Presbyterian Church in early 1992 to seek out the feelings of people of faith in the Austin area, to present this program to them and see how it would be accepted, because it's a very volunteer-intensive program. So we had that early meeting at Central Presbyterian Church, and there were about 23 bodies of faith and organizations involved in that meeting, and everyone was very enthusiastic about it, because it was a program that didn't cost a whole lot of money, but that a lot of people could be involved in practicing their faith, in giving and in doing for this, to help alleviate this problem that everyone saw as, you know, you can't walk down the streets without being hit with the issue of homelessness in Austin.
Right. Well, you know, one of the things that, having had some part in this myself, and knowing the value that it has for people who participate, and presumably for the people for whom this is designed, give us a little bit of a sense of how many people are, you know, ministered to at a given time, and so from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, or beginning of the week to the end of the week, just a time frame for that.
Okay. Each church hosts families for 1 week, and we host 3 to 5 families during a week's period. The families, however, can stay with us about 30 days, and over a period of a year, we have served about 25 families, which is actually a total of 80 individuals that we've been able to serve.
So there's a limit in any given week to how many folks that you can be working with.
That's correct.
And it's up to, what, about 14 or so?
About 15 people, and part of the reason for that, Rich, is that the whole philosophy behind the program is to use existing resources. And so that's why we looked at church facilities and church volunteers, and also the financial support behind churches to be able to run a program like this. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't go out and purchase a home to place people in. Rather, we use the facilities that we have at hand.
Right. Paul, do you think this is appealing from your standpoint, that so many churches stand empty so much of the time, and that this keeps them from being any more of a white elephant than need be?
Well, I think that's one of the real attractive things about the Hospitality Network, and that is that not only are people in churches looking for opportunities to really apply their faith, but we also do have the facilities that really do often stand empty, like you said, Rich. Our particular facility, we actually have a separate house that we use for this purpose, but each of the churches have their own unique facilities that they can apply those to the network, typically in classrooms or other facilities, to try to give the family some privacy during that week. So it's a it's a good aspect of the program to use the church facilities without having to necessarily go out and add to it.
Well, if we go back to, you know, the schedule for the day, give us a little bit of a sense of what happens from dawn to dusk kind of thing.
During the day, the families are doing what most families do, which is taking their children to daycare, to school, going to work. Most of our families do work or are looking for employment or education and training, and I am there to assist them in that process. So they're very busy during the day. They're not just sitting and waiting for anything. They are out actively looking and searching for housing, for jobs, as well as perhaps going to a job they already have. In the evenings, the shelter portion of it with the churches begins about 5:30 in the evenings, where we have a van that will assist families in picking up their children and taking them to a particular church site.
Okay. And I'd like to pick it up in just a moment about by the time they get to the church site over the evening. I know Maria spent the night in the church with these folks and can vouch about that. But one thing during the day, where do these people get these support services? I know you have a facility here. Where is that, and how do you manage that?
We have a day center, which is, again, we use church facilities. It is located at First United Methodist Church Annex Building, and they've been very generous to assist us in using that space. And the families have a room. It's like a large living area where they can, and their own phone where they can make calls. There's a refrigerator and a kitchen area where they can have meals there, their lunches. In addition to that, I use a lot of my time to develop resources for them, to work closely with other housing organizations that provide long-term housing, to work with other agencies that provide employment services, or other agencies that provide child care assistance. So part of my job is targeting those resources so that I can be of best assistance to the families.
So during the day, you're busy.
Yes, very much.
I mean, you're helping people get jobs, housing. You're interviewing people to come into the program as others move out of the program. I mean, makes my head swim just to hear you talk about it. Talk about what goes on at, you know, in the evenings and as church volunteers come in and how they interact with folks there.
Okay, you have to stop and think about what you do in the evening and what I do in the evening. I generally wash my clothes and I prepare for the next day and I have dinner. Well, these families need to do the same thing. So our facilities, our church buildings are turned into their housing headquarters for this particular week. We, at Central Presbyterian, we take our individual classrooms and literally turn those into bedrooms. So each family has their own room, and that's sacrosanct to them. That is their area for that week. We have washing facilities and so on. So the families come in, they're tired, the children have homework to do, we have dinner, and the families do what it is that they need to do in a home-like setting, in a relaxed setting. There is so much goodwill and feelings between the volunteers and the families. The volunteers had to be trained. This was one of the things that we had to do prior to opening this program and establishing it. Volunteers had to go through a training session, a sensitivity session.
One of the things we're going to have to do, excuse me, Maria, is that we have to take a break at this point, but hold that thought and we'll come back to it and to reflecting on the Interfaith Hospitality Network otherwise. We'll be back in just a few moments. Stay with us.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472 7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue and to our discussion today about the Interfaith Hospitality Network. Just before the break, we were discussing this with Tamara Landry and with our friend from Church of the Hills and Paul Danley, and from Central Presbyterian Church, Maria Newman. Maria, just before we went off the air there for a moment, you were saying something about what happens at night. And it's like a family. You want to create an environment and relationships that would be like any home, except that it's in a church. And it's with volunteers who are coming in and interacting with these people that don't have a home at this point in time. What does that mean to the church folks? Speak from your own experience on that.
Well, it gives us an opportunity to practice our faith. It gives us an opportunity to practice what you preach.
Well, I mean, are you evangelizing these people and trying to...
No, we are not evangelizing. We're not proselytizing. We are feeding the hungry and providing housing for people who have a unique problem at this point in time in their life. Mm-hmm. We have the facilities. We have our own goods. We have our material goods that we can share, and that's what we're doing. We're sharing of ourselves, our time, and our facilities.
So sharing of your faith in a very practical way.
That's right.
In a caring way.
That's right.
And what about different age groups? I've been impressed what I've seen with kids, helping kids and
that's right.
Doing that kind of thing.
Well, this is something I'm just so pleased about Paul's family. Paul has an absolutely beautiful family, and you always see them together. You see his wife and his two children, and they always participate together as a family in working with the volunteers. And we have the same thing in all of the congregations. Mm-hmm. We have the same thing at Central with our families at Central Presbyterian. We'll have a man and his wife and all of the children come. And the children interact with the children as only
right.
children can.
What about your family? Speak directly about that.
My wife Judy is co-coordinator with me for our church, Church of the Hills. Then we have two children, Matthew, who's 11, and Melissa, who's 7. We all just really enjoy our week when it comes around. Really, in fact, the children want to be there too much and want to be there every day, all day if we'd let them. But we all just really enjoy spending the time with our guest families, just getting to know them a little bit. And like Maria was saying, we're just in a very natural way providing hospitality, but being there and just getting to know each other.
And isn't it the case, too, I've said at the beginning there are 20 churches, but there are 13 sites, so that implies you've got 6 or 7 churches that are supportive of what you're doing in terms of providing some folks to help and in other ways. Is that the case?
Yes, and they really do as much as the host churches in the way of volunteers, financial support, and other things like personal items and food that we need to run the program. They just felt that they did not either have the facilities at this time to provide an actual site.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and but they may be other churches coming around who say, we'd like to take part in this too. Aren't you have kind of a vision of the network becoming more than just one set of 13?
Establishing a second network.
Yes.
Are you moving in that direction?
I think that we continually have churches that show interest, and we certainly add to our existing network, and then as we grow, when we have enough churches to build a second network, I think that's definitely in the future.
Mm-hmm. Some of the larger cities have more than one network.
Oh, yes. Philadelphia in particular has 3 networks, as I understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I'd like to take a little bit different approach here in terms of someone that may just be tuning in, or Interfaith Hospitality Network, families staying at churches. Why wouldn't why wouldn't they be staying at the Salvation Army? What's there unique about this, or why do you need this in addition to that?
I think that's an excellent question. The Texas Education Agency just did a study about the number of homeless children in Austin, and they came up with 8,000 homeless children that were either doubled up with families, living with families in other apartments, in hotels, and on the street. I mean, just those numbers alone doesn't tell you the number of people that are homeless in Austin, but there are not enough shelters, first of all, to go around to serve all the families in need. That's number one. Number two is the Salvation Army has its purpose in place, and it certainly is a service to the community. But they have some rules and regulations that the families speak to me about that are less than comfortable they feel for them. One of those is that the fathers have to be split up from the family unit and live in the men's dorm instead of the family being able to stay together. That's the one that's most quoted to me. And then secondly, you have to be in at a certain time in order to get a bed. And many of our families, they're really trying to make it, and they have jobs that maybe are at night or in the early morning hours, and it's very difficult to continue that job if they have restrictions like time that they have to be in to a shelter.
Okay, so it provides some flexibility in that regard. And you mentioned earlier, too, about the number of families that you've graduated from the program. Give us a little sense of where these folks are now and some of the experiences that they've had after IHN.
Sure. A year later, we can probably talk with you about each of those families and know where they are and what they've been doing. Majority of them are currently working. We have, out of the 25 families, about 20 of them actually have found permanent housing. Examples of that are through Habitat for Humanity, which actually builds a home for a family, or transitional housing through HOBO, which is another very supportive agency, or other kinds of transitional housing or subsidized housing, or even private apartments too. And so all those families have housing. Most of them, of course, in order to pay rent, you have to have some kind of income. Some of the families have gone, one family in particular I know has gone back to college, another family is in training. So those are examples of what's going on with, and the children. There's so many stories about the children too. One of the children that we have just come to stay with us was just participated in Special Olympics. So things are going on in their lives. They're continuing.
Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? And can you all add to what you know of how these families have fared through the program?
Well, it's been my experience that the families are so pleased with this program, and they're anxious to assist other families needing help. They're very supportive while they're in the program, and then a family that, as we say, graduates from the program and finds housing of their own, many of them want to continue to help. One father, for instance, who has a pickup truck, is always readily available to move other families out of the program and help them move into their new apartment or their new home.
So the people who have been helped are now helping.
That's exactly right. It's payback, and they enjoy the opportunity to do that.
Okay. Paul, could you add our store of knowledge in terms of how this has helped folks in their transitions?
We've enjoyed, I think, that end of the network and helping move folks into their apartments, and just to kind of see that on their faces that finally they've got their own place again and are able to have a new start, and have enjoyed that, and have also seen the pitching in among the different families, and that's a real, I think, a neat thing about the network, to be able to stay involved with families as they go on,
yeah, and I've also had occasion to observe that it's changed people's perception about the homeless, that so often are identified with maybe people out along I-35 with their signs, begging for help, or stories of how folks have taken advantage of the gullible public sort of thing. And when you get into relationships with people who are trying and who are really an inspiration, I mean, it's not just that they're getting inspired, but they're offering it. And it becomes a two-way relationship. I'm just wondering if you've had that sense of how that transforms our perceptions and our interactions.
I was going to say something about that. I think the whole point of Interfaith is about building community and about breaking down stereotypes about homelessness, about reaching across faiths, races, ethnicities. And I think that's really what makes it unique and different than other programs.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is when you mentioned, was it 8,000 children who are homeless in Austin? And I think, oh, my gosh, this is just a drop in the bucket. But it reminds me of if you have a drop of ink that is really pure and that can give color to the whole, in a sense. That it seems to me this is the kind of witness that is represented by, even though you've only got maybe 14 people at a time, it has a disproportionate effect. And maybe even in terms of policy, are you all involved in any kind of lobbying for homeless causes, or is it all just service to homeless people?
Yes, we are. Both of us, Executive Director Grace Lee and myself, are involved in various coalitions, speaking at City Council chamber meetings in order to solicit additional resources and services such as the child care and housing, etc., for the homeless, because we know that's going to make our job a lot easier to work with the families if they have places they can go.
Okay. Have you all been involved in that aspect of it at all, the public policy side?
No, not so much, mostly working with our church.
Well, as a board member on Foundation for the Homeless, I work very closely with Grace Lee, with Tamara, and yes, we see ourselves as advocates, and not only here in Austin, but statewide and nationwide.
Well, in the minute we have left, I'd like to just reflect with us on what a celebration can be had after your first birthday in doing this, and that if people want to know more about this and carry it from here, if we have a number that we can share, that would be helpful. Can you just give us that? And
That is 472-8295 is our central office, which is at the First United Methodist Church.
okay, and we would encourage you folks, as you've been looking in on our show today, to follow through on this as you are led to share in ministry to and with the homeless folks. Thank you, Tamara, Paul, Maria.
It's my pleasure.
And you folks join us again next week on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.